Expecting nothing more than spilled lattes and rude customers, you clock into your minimum wage cafe job on a perfectly normal day. What you certainly don't anticipate is an older woman with a gunshot wound stumbling through the door. Even less expected is the immediate consequence of saving her life. Finding 5 heavily armed men in bespoke suits surrounding your counter the very next morning. The rain in Chicago that Tuesday night was relentless, beating against the grease-stained windows of the Midnight Cup like a drum. Minna Jenkins wiped down the laminate counter for the 4th time in an hour, her eyes darting to the digital clock above the pastry case, 2:14 a.m. At 22, Minna was running on fumes, stale black coffee, and the crushing weight of her younger brother's medical bills. Toby needed a new kidney, and her tips from the graveyard shift were barely keeping the collection agencies from kicking down their apartment door. The diner was empty, smelling faintly of bleach and burnt espresso. Then the brass bell above the door chimed frantically. Minna looked up, her customer service smile freezing on her face. A woman stumbled into the diner. She looked to be in her late 60s, dressed in an immaculate cream-colored cashmere coat that was rapidly turning a horrifying, sticky crimson down her left side. "Ma'am?" Minna dropped her rag, rushing around the counter. "Ma'am, you're bleeding. I'm calling 911. No!" The woman's hand shot out, her grip shockingly strong. Her fingers, heavy with diamond rings, dug into Minna's wrist. She had striking, silver-streaked dark hair and piercing brown eyes that held no panic, only a cold, hard urgency. "No police, no hospitals. If you call them, I am dead." "You've been shot," Minna breathed, the metallic scent of blood hitting her. "A graze. But they are still looking for me." The woman gasped, leaning heavily against the counter. "Please, hide me." Before Minna could process the insanity of the request, the headlights of a black SUV swept across the diner's windows. The vehicle idled across the street. 2 men stepped out. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They wore dark leather jackets, their hands tucked suspiciously into their pockets as they scanned the block. Adrenaline, sharp and freezing, spiked in Minna's veins. Survival instinct kicked in. "Come on," Minna whispered. She hooked her arm under the woman's shoulders and half dragged, half carried her toward the back of the diner. She shoved the woman into the cramped, windowless walk-in pantry, shoving her down behind 3 massive 50-pound sacks of flour. "Stay perfectly quiet," Minna ordered, her voice trembling but firm. Minna sprinted back to the front. There was a smear of blood on the white tile. Panic seized her throat. She grabbed the mop bucket left out from earlier, sloshed soapy, bleach-heavy water onto the floor, and began mopping vigorously, her heart hammering against her ribs. 10 seconds later, the diner door swung open. The 2 men stepped inside. Up close, they were terrifying, scarred, cold-eyed, and radiating violence. One of them, a man with a jagged scar cutting through his eyebrow, stepped up to the counter. "We're looking for someone," he grunted, his eyes darting around the empty booths. "An older lady. Fancy coat. She come in here?" Minna leaned against the mop handle, perfectly feigning the exhausted apathy of a minimum wage worker. She popped a bubble of chewing gum. "You mean the crazy lady who came in screaming about a taxi?" The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "Where did she go?" "She tried to use the phone. I told her it was for employees only, so she cursed me out and ran back outside." Minna pointed out the side window with a lazy finger. "Headed toward the subway station on 4th Street. If you hurry, you can probably catch her, assuming she didn't fall into a puddle." The men exchanged a look. The second man peered over the counter, trying to see down the hallway, but Minna shifted, blocking his line of sight with her body. "Let's go," the scarred man muttered. They turned and bolted out the door, disappearing into the torrential rain. Minna waited a full minute, her knees shaking so badly she almost collapsed. Once she was sure they were gone, she locked the front door, flipped the sign to "closed," and rushed back to the pantry. The older woman was pale, sweating profusely. "They're gone," Minna said, dropping to her knees. She dragged over the diner's dusty first aid kit and a bottle of high-proof vodka her manager kept hidden under the sink. "I have to look at your side. This is going to hurt." The woman nodded once. Minna unbuttoned the ruined cashmere. It was a vicious graze along her ribs, deep, but thankfully not a lodged bullet. Minna's hands moved with practiced efficiency, a tragic byproduct of patching up her brother's various injuries when they couldn't afford a doctor. She sterilized the wound with the vodka, earning a sharp hiss from the woman, packed it with gauze, and wrapped a tight compression bandage around her torso. "You are surprisingly calm for a barista," the woman rasped, catching her breath. "My brother is sick," Minna muttered, tying off the bandage. "I'm used to blood and panic. What's your name?" "Carmela." The woman adjusted her blouse, eyeing Minna with sudden, intense scrutiny. "And yours?" "Minna." "You lied to those men without blinking, Minna. You saved my life." Carmela reached into her pocket. She pulled out a heavy, matte black card with nothing but a gold-embossed crest on it, a roaring lion, and a phone number. She pressed into Minna's palm. "Do not lose this. When the time comes, you will know how to use it." Within the hour, a discreet, armored town car pulled into the back alley. Carmela slipped out the kitchen door, leaving Minna alone in the quiet diner, wondering if she had just hallucinated the entire night. At 7:12 a.m., the sun finally broke through the Chicago skyline, casting a gray, miserable light over the city. Minna was completely exhausted. Her shift was supposed to end at 6, but her relief, Brenda, was notoriously late. Minna was wiping down the espresso machine, the black card still sitting heavy in the pocket of her apron when a low rumble shook the front windows. She looked up. 3 massive black Lincoln Navigators aggressively hopped the curb, boxing in the front of the diner. Minna's blood ran cold. They came back, she thought. The men from last night figured out I lied. She instinctively reached for the panic button under the counter, but before her fingers could find it, the doors of the SUVs opened. 5 men stepped out. But these weren't the street-level thugs in leather jackets from the night before. These men were terrifyingly polished. They wore custom-tailored dark suits, earpieces, and carried themselves with a disciplined, predatory grace. They moved in perfect synchronization, forming a perimeter around the entrance. The diner door chimed. The 5 behemoths walked in, instantly making the small café feel suffocatingly small. The first man, a mountain with a shaved head, strode straight to the door, flipped the sign back to closed, and twisted the deadbolt lock. "Hey!" Minna shouted, backing away from the register, grabbing the heaviest coffee tamper she could find. "You can't lock that! I'm calling the police!" The men didn't even flinch. They simply parted down the middle, making way for a 6th man who had just stepped out of the center vehicle. When he walked in, the air in the room seemed to freeze. I was in his late 20s, perhaps early 30s, devastatingly handsome, but completely devoid of warmth. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that screamed old money, his dark hair slicked back perfectly. His jaw was sharp enough to cut glass, but it was his eyes that terrified Minna. They were a pale, striking green, and completely devoid of mercy. He stopped directly in front of the counter. He didn't look at the menu. He looked right through Minna. "Minna Jenkins," he said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone, thick with an underlying threat. "Who wants to know?" Minna snapped, raising the steel tamper like a weapon, though her hands were shaking. The man tilted his head, a dark, cynical amusement dancing in his eyes. "My name is Zio Moretti. You spent an hour with my mother, Carmela, last night." Minna exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her. Moretti, the woman's son. He was here to thank her. She lowered the tamper slightly. "Oh, thank God. How is she? Is she okay?" Zio's expression didn't soften. In fact, it grew colder. "She is in surgery. She lost a lot of blood, but she will live." He leaned over the counter, invading Minna's space, the scent of expensive cologne and petrichor washing over her. "What I want to know, Minna, is how a 22-year-old barista with $70,000 in medical debt happens to be in the exact right place at the exact right time to intercept the head of the Moretti family after an ambush." Minna blinked, stunned. "Intercept? I didn't intercept anyone. She stumbled in here bleeding to death. And you just happened to hide her." Zio's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You just happened to know exactly how to lie to Arthur Russo's hitmen. You patched a gunshot wound with the efficiency of a cartel doctor, asked for zero money, and sent her on her way." "I was trying to help an old lady," Minna cried out, her anger finally overriding her fear. "What is wrong with you? I saved her life." "Or," Zio said, his green eyes flashing violently, "you are one of Russo's little rats. You staged a rescue to get close to her, to gain her trust, to get inside our house. You are insane," Minna spat. She slammed the tamper down on the counter. "I don't know who you are. I don't know who Arthur Russo is, and I don't care about your paranoid Mafia delusions. Get out of my diner." The bodyguards shifted, instantly tense at her disrespect, but Zio held up a single, gloved hand. The room fell dead silent. Zio stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. He was searching for a crack in her armor, a tell, a sign of deception. Minna stared back, refusing to break eye contact, her chest heaving with indignation. Finally, Zio stood up straight and buttoned his suit jacket. "Rocco," Zio said softly, not looking away from Minna. The mountain with the shaved head stepped forward. "Yes, boss." "Clear the register. Leave 10,000 in cash for the damage to the floor. Then grab her." Minna's heart stopped. "Wait, what? No." Before she could run, the door to the kitchen burst open. Two of the suited men had already flanked around the back. One of them grabbed Minna by the arms, not forcefully enough to break bones, but with an iron grip she couldn't possibly escape. "Let me go!" Minna screamed, kicking wildly, knocking over a stack of ceramic mugs that shattered across the floor. "I have a brother. He's sick. He needs me to be home by 9. Zio turned, his profile sharp against the morning light bleeding through the windows. "If you are telling the truth, Minna, your brother will be perfectly fine, and you will be home for dinner. But if I find out you are lying..." He looked back at her, his eyes dead and hollow. "You won't have to worry about your brother's medical bills ever again." Zio walked out into the rain. Rocco easily scooped Minna off her feet, ignoring her thrashing and screaming, and carried her out the door, tossing her into the back of the center SUV. The doors slammed shut, the locks clicking loudly like the ceiling of a vault. As the motor roared to life and the convoy sped away from the diner, Minna looked out the tinted window, realizing with sickening clarity that saving Carmela Moretti hadn't been a good deed. It was a death sentence. The drive took less than 20 minutes, but to Minna, trapped in the back of the armored navigator, flanked by silent giants, it felt like a lifetime. The convoy tore through the slick Chicago streets and pulled into a sprawling, high-walled estate in the wealthy enclave of Lake Forest. Wrought iron gates swung open, revealing a limestone mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. Rocco dragged Minna out of the vehicle and escorted her through heavy mahogany double doors, down a dimly lit hallway lined with classical art, and shoved her into a vast, wood-paneled study. The door clicked shut behind her, locking from the outside. Minna paced the Persian rug like a cowed animal. 10 minutes later, the door unlocked. Zio Moretti walked in. He had shed his suit jacket, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt, revealing forearms corded with muscle and faint, jagged scars. He tossed a manila folder onto the massive oak desk. "Sit," he commanded, his voice deadening the room's acoustics. "I prefer to stand," Minna shot back, crossing her arms to hide her trembling hands. "Am I a hostage, Mr. Moretti? Because if I am, you've kidnapped the poorest girl in Chicago." Zio ignored her defiance, opening the folder. "I don't believe in coincidences. The moment you were in my car, my team ran a full diagnostic on your life, your digital footprint, your finances, your family." He turned the folder around so Minna could see it. Inside was a neatly printed matrix of her entire miserable existence. Subject profile: Minna Jenkins category. Verified information. Flag status: current debt, $74,500. Overdue medical bills. High vulnerability next of kin. Toby Jenkins, age 12, Ward 4, Chicago Gen. Primary motivation: criminal record clean. 2 parking tickets. No Mafia ties. Bank balance: $400,000. Extreme poverty. Minna's breath hitched. Seeing her desperation laid out in black and white, quantified by a ruthless mob boss, made her stomach churn. "You invaded my privacy. You looked into my brother's medical records." "I look into everything that threatens my family," Zio stated coldly. He leaned against the edge of the desk, crossing his arms. "On paper, you are exactly what you claim to be. A desperate sister drowning in debt. The perfect target for Arthur Russo to bribe. $50,000 would change your life. Did he offer you that to leave the kitchen door unlocked?" "No one offered me anything," Minna yelled, stepping forward, the fear finally giving way to sheer, unadulterated rage. "I saved your mother. I lied to men with guns for a stranger. And instead of a thank you, I get abducted, threatened, and treated like a criminal." She slammed her hand on the desk, right next to his folder. "If I worked for Russo, why would I patch her up? Why wouldn't I just let her bleed out in my pantry? Use your brain, Zio." Silence stretched between them. Zio looked down at her hand, pale and small against the dark wood, then slowly brought his piercing green eyes back up to her face. Nobody yelled at Zio Moretti. The bodyguards standing outside the door shifted, sensing the tension. But Zio didn't flinch. For the first time, a flicker of something other than suspicion crossed his features. It was intrigue. Before he could respond, the study door swung open. "Put your fangs away, Zionardo," a weak but commanding voice rasped. Zio snapped to attention. Carmela Moretti sat in a wheelchair in the doorway, hooked up to a portable IV drip, pushed by a man in a white medical coat. She looked pale and exhausted, but her eyes held the same terrifying authority as her son's. "Mother," Zio said, his tone instantly shifting from ruthless interrogator to protective son. He rushed forward. "You should be in bed. The doctor said—" "I know what the doctor said," Carmela interrupted, waving him off. She looked past him, her eyes locking onto Minna. A faint, genuine smile touched her lips. "I see my son lacks my manners. Minna, I apologize. He was raised by wolves. Mother, she could be compromised," Zio warned, his jaw tight. "She is a barista who makes $12 an hour and handles a bullet wound better than half your captains," Carmela snapped. "She hid me. She lied for me. If she was Russo's spy, I would be in a morgue. Let the girl go." Zio hesitated, his eyes darting between his mother and the furious girl standing by his desk. The logic was undeniable. He ran a hand through his slicked-back hair, the polished veneer cracking just enough to show his exhaustion. "Fine," Zio exhaled, the fight leaving his shoulders. He looked at Minna, his expression unreadable. "I will have Rocco drive you back to your apartment." "No," Minna said flatly. Zio raised a dark eyebrow. "No, my shift was supposed to end an hour ago. I was supposed to be at the hospital for Toby's dialysis appointment." Minna's voice cracked for the first time, the adrenaline crash hitting her hard. "If I don't show up, they won't start his treatment. Please, just take me to Chicago, General." Zio stared at her. The coldness in his green eyes was entirely gone, replaced by a sudden, sharp intensity. He didn't call for his bodyguard. Instead, he grabbed the keys to the navigator off the desk. "I'll take you myself." The ride to Chicago General Hospital was suffocatingly quiet. The heavy doors of the armored Lincoln Navigator sealed away the noise of the torrential rain, leaving only the hum of the engine and the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. Minna sat in the passenger seat, gripping the edge of her seatbelt until her knuckles turned white. She expected a convoy, a parade of armed guards following them, but Zio drove the massive SUV himself, having completely dismissed his security detail with a single, sharp gesture before they left the estate. Given the brutal ambush on his mother the night before, Minna realized this was highly reckless. "You really don't have to do this," Minna mumbled, staring out the rain-streaked window at the blurred city lights. Her voice sounded fragile, while in the cavernous, leather-scented interior of the car. "I just need a drop-off at the front entrance." "My family owes you a life debt, Minna," Zio said, his eyes fixed on the slick road ahead. The dashboard lights cast sharp shadows across his angular jaw. "We do not leave debts unpaid. Carmela Moretti is the heart of my syndicate. You kept that heart beating. A simple taxi ride does not balance the scales." When they arrived at the hospital, Minna didn't wait for him to park. She threw open the door, sprinting through the sliding glass entrance, practically ignoring Zio as she bolted toward the pediatric ward. The familiar, oppressive smell of antiseptic and stale cafeteria food hit her immediately. She navigated the labyrinth of fluorescent-lit hallways until she burst into Toby's room. Her 12-year-old brother was sitting up in bed, looking frighteningly small and pale. He was hooked up to the humming dialysis machine, a labyrinth of tubes connecting him to his lifeline. "Minna!" Toby beamed, his tired eyes lighting up at the sight of her wet, disheveled uniform. Hey, buddy, Minna choked out, rushing to the side of the bed and pressing a fierce kiss to his warm forehead. I'm so sorry I'm late. The weather was crazy and the diner got a little overwhelming. It's okay. A nice nurse brought me some cherry jello. Toby pointed a frail finger toward the doorway. Who is your friend? Minna turned. Zio was standing in the doorway, entirely filling the frame. He looked utterly out of place in his bespoke charcoal suit amidst the sterile, depressing reality of the public hospital. Yet he wasn't looking at the peeling paint or the outdated machinery. He was watching the siblings with a strange, quiet reverence. The cold, lethal mob boss from the study was temporarily replaced by a man observing a genuine bond he rarely saw in his own ruthless world. Minna stood up, smoothing her apron, and stepped out into the hallway, pulling the door partially shut behind her so Toby couldn't hear. Thank you for the ride, Mr. Moretti, Minna said stiffly, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. You can consider your debt paid in full. Go back to your mansion. It isn't safe for you out here. Your brother needs a kidney, Zio stated bluntly, completely ignoring her dismissal. Type O negative. He has been sitting on the public transplant list for 3 years, with his condition deteriorating by the month. Minna's heart pounded, a sudden fierce spike of protective anger rising in her throat. How do you know his blood type? I told you to stop digging into my life. Because. Zio stepped closer, closing the distance between them, until Minna had to tilt her head back to look into his striking green eyes. In my world, Minna, when we want a problem solved, we do not wait in line. We do not hope for a miracle on a public registry. We simply buy the solution. Minna's breath hitched. What exactly are you saying? I am saying I have already made the calls to my network, Zio said, locking eyes with her. His voice was a low, smooth cadence that sent a shiver down her spine. A compatible, pristine donor organ has been secured from a private facility overseas. It is currently being flown into Chicago via my private jet. My personal surgical team will operate on Toby tomorrow morning at our private clinic. Minna stared at him, unable to process the magnitude of his words. Furthermore, Zio continued, his gaze unwavering, the $74,000 in medical debt sitting in your file, it is gone. It was paid in full 20 minutes ago while you were crying by his bed. Minna's knees finally buckled. The sheer weight of 3 years of crushing anxiety vanished in a matter of seconds, leaving her entirely untethered. She reached out blindly to brace herself against the wall, but Zio caught her arms. His grip was firm, strong, and anchoring. Why? Minna whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes, hot and fast, staining her cheeks. Why would you do all of this for a stranger? Because you protected what was mine, Zio murmured. He reached up, his thumb brushing a stray tear from her cheek. A shockingly gentle gesture from a man whose hands were stained with blood. Now I protect what is yours. Protect what is. Suddenly, the tender moment shattered. Zio's secure satellite phone vibrated violently inside his jacket. He answered it, pressing it to his ear. Minna watched the warmth vanish from his face, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek. The lethal predator was instantly back. When? Zio barked into the phone. Are there casualties? Understood. He hung up, immediately grabbing Minna's hand with an iron grip. We have to move. Right now. What's going on? Minna panicked, digging her heels into the linoleum. I can't leave Toby. He's mid-treatment. Arthur Russo's men just hit your cafe. They firebombed it, Zio said, his eyes rapidly scanning the length of the hospital corridor, assessing choke points and exits. They found out you helped my mother last night, your relief worker, Brenda. She sold you out for a stack of cash. Russo knows you're connected to the Moretti family now. This hospital is compromised. Before Minna could even scream, the heavy double doors at the end of the pediatric hall swung open. 2 men in long, heavy trench coats stepped out of the stairwell. They didn't look like doctors or grieving fathers. When they saw Zio, their hands dipped beneath their coats, drawing suppressed, long-barrel handguns. Instinct and training took over. Zio violently shoved Minna behind the heavy wooden door of an empty janitorial closet, shielding her with his broad shoulders as the dull, deadly thwip-thwip of silenced gunfire tore into the drywall right where they had been standing. Plaster dusted their hair. Zio didn't flinch. He drew a matte black Glock from his shoulder holster with terrifying, blinding speed. He stepped half out of cover and returned fire, his movements precise, calculated, and utterly devoid of hesitation. 2 deafening shots echoed like cannon fire in the tight, enclosed space, shattering the hospital's silence. Both attackers dropped instantly to the floor, motionless. Minna covered her ears, letting out a stifled sob of terror. "Quiet," Zio ordered, grabbing her by the waist and pulling her back into the hallway, his weapon still raised. "My men are locking down the perimeter. Toby is safe." Rocco came in through the loading dock and is already inside his room. True to his word, Rocco and 3 other heavily armed men in suits poured out of the adjacent stairwell, swarming the corridor and forming an impenetrable wall around Toby's door. "Get the boy disconnected and ready for immediate transport," Zio barked at Rocco, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "We are moving him to the clinic immediately. Shoot anyone who isn't wearing our colors." He turned back to Minna, his chest heaving slightly, his green eyes burning with an intense, possessive fire that made her breath catch. "You are coming with me," Zio stated, not as a request, but as an undeniable fact. "You belong to the Moretti family now, Minna. Anyone who wants to touch you will have to walk through me." What a wild twist of fate. Minna's life changed forever the night she decided to protect a stranger in a run-down cafe. Will she survive the ruthless world of the Moretti family, or will Russo's vendetta catch up to them? If you are on the edge of your seat during this Mafia romance, smash that like button. Share this story with your fellow drama lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories.